Oh! Ow!
Oh! Line by 7 strides.
Oh! Ooh! Oh!
So apparently he will do anything for money.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of 1980s Now, a weekly examination of the importance of 1980s pop culture and its influence today. My name is Will, and joining me as always are my friends and co-hosts, Kat and John. Hey, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hey, howdy.
I'm so glad you remembered your little spiel this week, Will.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I appreciate your help last time.
No problem. No problem.
Getting me through that. Hey, and also don't forget, in addition to his co-hosting duties here, John hosts his very own podcast, Gen X Grown Up. Oh, that reminds me. I've got my shirt on today.
You have a shirt too? Look at you two. Look at you two.
Oh my God. I can't.
Your Gen X Grown Up t-shirts
too.
On? Wow.
Oh, wow. Totally
I'm blown away.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
This is
guys.
And it's Christmas colors.
Oh my God.
Isn't that really cool?
Oh my goodness.
I'm wearing a Gen X MTV inspired shirt. You can get your own if you go to the Gen X Grown Up store on TeePublic. I got mine.
They do come in other colors besides Christmas colors.
Yes.
You get
They
to
do.
choose your own. Yeah.
But you guys are very elfin. Like, you look like you're working in Santa's workshop.
Yeah, yes. I just need those pointy hats.
Which one of you wants to be a dentist? I can't remember
I
which one.
guess I'm on my own now.
You know, I have one other thought about Gen X Grown Up. I want to tell you everybody what's on the show before we get too far here. Because on today's show, we're going to be speaking with John Walsh. No, not that one. Not the one that saves children. This one's the guy's doing something much more important. I'm talking about John Walsh, the award-winning author and filmmaker, the trustee of the Ray Harryhausen Foundation. I think that's so super cool.
Yeah.
You know, if you recall, I spoke with John last year about his then new book, Escape from New York, the official story of the film. It's such a cool book. Right. It had stories in it that hadn't been told, had photos in it that hadn't been seen, because since it's an official book, he has access to the archives of the studio, all of the behind the scenes material, and he gets, of course, he's able to get score interviews with the filmmakers as well. Well, this year he's just came out in the UK, and it's just to be published here in the US at the end of December. Doctor Who and the Daleks, the official story of the films. Now, these two films came out in 65 and 66, I believe. But that said, they have a couple of interesting ties to the 1980s that. Hey, I love talking to John anyway, so I didn't need an excuse to do that, but we get into that a little bit. And I should just disclose right now, Kat and John weren't available at the time to talk to him, so I spoke to him by myself, so they'll be hearing it too for the first time. But anyway, because there's this character, Milton Subotsky, that I learned about only from reading John's book, who was an expat, an American expat who lived in England, who got the rights to Doctor Who to make these movies. And he then went on in the 80s to also produce a number of different Stephen King novels, including Cat's Eye and Maximum Overdrive. It's just like this guy you've never heard of who's accomplished quite a bit by just being a hustler and being in the right place at the right time. We talk a little bit about that too.
Wow.
Anyway, before that, though, we're going to review current news stories related to 1980s media, including... This sounds real. I'm scraping the barrel, guys. I'm telling you. I don't know. Is it the holidays? It can't be related to the holidays, right? I mean, I don't know.
One of them, I was like, what is this?
What I see these as is jumping off points for us to talk about other stuff. Okay.
See there?
That's what's going to
happen.
happen.
You got this. Do it.
The 1980, folks, stay with us. It gets increasingly better. The 1984 computer code that you probably used this week. A new 1980s era novel based on an unusual pastime or stunt. I don't know what to say. The Dark Tower is getting a series. Remember that those novels that kicked off in the 1980s? And we've got a director now for Ghostbusters Afterlife, and it's the first time it's not I was going to say not a Venkman, not a Reitman.
Yeah.
All right.
There's time codes in the notes if you want to skip around. So yeah, nice. I was thinking about Gen X Grown Up, John's other show, and in our show, because there's these neat little I don't know, like overlaps that happen. These sort of things that happen where, because I listen to John's show and we prepare ourselves separately, but sometimes there's just little funny or interesting things that coincide. And I wanted to bring up this one thing. So John on our show, a couple of weeks ago, it was the episode, I think right before Thanksgiving, we were talking about how Sylvester Stallone turned down, I think it was $36 million to do Rambo 4.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And John said he could relate to turning down money. And he said this.
You know, later in my life now, as I get older,
Yeah.
I'm realizing that you can't just get paid. There's not enough money to get paid to get kicked in the teeth. If there's something you just really don't want to do, there is a limit.
Wow.
So John won't necessarily do anything for money.
Right?
So cut to just a few days later on the Gen X Grown Ups YouTube channel. I'm going to play you something for you, and I guarantee you, although it sounds really sexy, what's happening is not. And we could talk about that in a moment here. This is John on his YouTube channel.
Oh! Ow! 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 Ow!
It's
Oh!
line by 7 strides.
Oh! Ooh! Oh! Oh! I think I gotta wrap it up. My stomach hurts. Like, oh
my gosh.
Really?
big time. Yeah.
You okay there,
Yeah.
Joey?
I gotta go to the bathroom. I gotta go.
All right, go, man, go.
John, whatever you were doing on that clip there, were you doing it for money?
I was. It probably largely in part because my situation changed.
You're right.
Perspective.
Yeah.
Part of that, what you said about Stallone was, look, $36 million or $136 million, it wasn't going to change his lifestyle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You're right.
Well, it turns out eating incredibly hot sauce on a YouTube live stream, that could be life-changing money when you're unemployed, which I became a few days after I said that about Stallone.
Yeah.
Although, if I had $36 million in the bank, I wouldn't have been eating hot sauce.
No.
I'll admit that. So.
No need to mess around with hot sauce.
Gosh. Oh, goodness.
So John, on occasion, does these videos on YouTube where, look, he does constant videos on YouTube, but among them, he does these lives where they're playing video games and doing other fun things. And this one, if folks contributed a certain amount of money, he would consume a certain hot sauce, and they got increasingly higher. I think the highest level was something like 3 million Scoville units altogether or something like that.
It's something like that. It's
Times
like 3 parts,
7.
1 million capsaicin and all these other habaneros and ghost peppers. And it was hot.
I can't, look, I like spicy stuff, but I don't like stuff that hurts me. And it's like getting a chemical burn from what I understand, right?
Yeah. They even say, like, I'll often, on those streams, I'll eat it sauce side down on the little cracker. And they're like, don't do that. It'll burn your tongue. And I'm like, nope, give the people what they paid for. Yeah. They paid to see me suffer. I'm going to do it.
Hey, look, if you'd like to give John $1 to get him to eat 3 million Scoville units.
I hope that was worth more than $1.
Yes.
It was.
What was really cool is you could give him $1. You could give George and Mo $1, I guess. And they would let him have some sour cream or milk. I got to say, your two co-hosts are kind of assholes to you during that whole time.
they do brutalize me.
Oh,
That's true.
That was horrible. Yeah. John was suffering, and they were refusing to let him have water or milk or anything. Oh, and John stuck with it.
Did they get to choose if you get the relief? Like, if people purchase relief for you, can they withhold?
I'll get it. It's just a question of when. It's a question of when I'm allowed to have it. How long they make me wait. Yeah.
That's so cruel.
Well, yeah. And what they did was, while John was clearly in agony, like he wasn't a performance.
I saw it.
They were negotiating just to do shtick. Like, I don't know. Maybe he could have it. Maybe he should have a.
So cruel.
That's
How many
my guys.
times have you done this? Yeah. How many times have you done the hot sauce?
That
challenge?
particular one 3 different times. Yeah.
And you got the hottest one before?
Mm-hmm. Oh, each time I get the hottest one. But this time it's a new set. It's a set of hot sauce called Crazy Ass. This is Crazy Ass 2. And I found that the hottest one was quite a bit hotter than Crazy Ass 1.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Wow.
My words on Stallone come back to haunt me.
I would need Stallone money to do what you did.
All right, let's talk about something more pleasant, like 1984 computer codes. When we get caught up with 1980s news.
So much more entertaining.
I like a lot of 1980s computer code. I'll tell you that right now.
So this is from ZDNet, where we get all of our great 1980s pop culture stories. We can now check out the source code for the 1980s programming language that sparked a revolution.
Woohoo! Checking out source code.
And you can go to a museum to look at it.
You know who wants to read the source code, don't you?
Neo?
I can't wait to read the source code.
Oh, Robert.
That's going to be exciting.
Yeah, finally. He's been waiting anxiously.
Oh, yeah.
It's about time.
About time. He's hashtag release the source code. With Adobe's permission, the Computer History Museum has released the source code for an early version of PostScript, a programming language programmed in the early 1980s by Adobe, which helped usher in desktop publishing and spawned the portable document format, which we refer to as PDF, of course. So yeah, look, the PDF even has origins in the 1980s.
I almost had a giggle fit there, but all of that just was really boring. Made it go away.
We have an antidote. I got to keep this
Cat's
close
like,
by.
tell me more about PostScript.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying the resolution scale, they were vectors and not bitmaps. This is fascinating.
We had to throw
So
cold water
funny.
on her giggle fits.
So funny.
You guys might remember PostScript. Adobe first shipped it in 1984, 2 years after the company was founded, and Apple co-founder Steve Jobs approached them to make PostScript useful for emerging laser printers. At the time, Apple launched its nearly $7,000 laser writer printer
Ooh,
that had PostScript built in
$7,000.
1985, helping spark the desktop printing boom.
That was a huge deal.
Wow.
I didn't have a laser printer. We had a dot matrix printer for the longest time. I don't remember if we ever got a laser printer in the 1980s. We certainly didn't have $7,000.
Well, I remember a group of friends that I knew who were Apple fanatics, and they wanted to dabble in desktop publishing. Like they went in together to buy one of these amazing printers that I don't know if it was $7,000. I'm sure it cost a few $1,000s though.
Yeah.
But there's no question that what they could produce, it literally was because it was scalable, vectorized text and graphics all together. Mm-hmm. Rather than, well, here's a bitmap and it looks like little chunky, stair steps or whatever. Like it would draw perfect curves and lines in the letters, and it just looks so good. And that's what they wanted. And man, it delivered.
Yeah, that's something. And of course, now 40 years later, we don't really appreciate that.
Right.
We couldn't print as easily or as consistently or nicely as we do now.
Yeah.
But yeah, John, that's exactly what their goal was, to do what John said about the scalability of it, and they did accomplish that. And another advance from Adobe was the typefaces for use with it. So I guess developing the different fonts. And as I mentioned, Adobe's PDF file format, which was standardized in 2008, is actually based on PostScript and has since replaced it as the cross-platform document sharing that was developed back then. What's interesting to me was that so like I said, they made this PostScript available for this museum, but at 1984, this programming code wasn't patentable because software couldn't be patented. So they were very protective of it. But the creator of the software said in an interview that we wouldn't have filed a patent anyway, quote, because to file a patent, you'd have to disclose. And we didn't want to disclose because it was some of the magic of our implementation of PostScript, end quote.
Oh.
Did you guys have personal computers at home? Have I asked you that before? Probably.
We did. We ended up with a hand-me-down.
Sure.
I don't even remember what it was, but I remember typing go to.
Yeah, basic.
Like I learned a little basic and
Yeah.
what did we even do? It just made a pattern, we could program a little basic thing on there. There was no printer though. The first printer in our house was the one I brought home with me from college after.
Oh, right.
the dot matrix. Yeah. But we didn't, we weren't really a computer household until much later.
No, I'm sure it'll come as no surprise to anyone that I had more than my fair share of computers growing up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I went right from my Atari 2600 to an Atari 8-bit computer, and I used that for forever. And then I got an Amiga because that was the kind of the bleeding edge. And I literally didn't get a Windows PC until Windows 95 came out. That was the first IBM PC clone that I ever got. But I dabbled in all those sorts of things. And if you're a big enough dork, you have to have a dot matrix printer, and the tractor feed paper, you tear off the sides, but it can only look so good. It's not like those cool PostScript printers were back then. It was kind of junky.
Guess what I still have?
A dot matrix printer?
Not the printer.
The paper?
The
paper?
Is it from college? Because
Box
we
of
had a
paper?
lot of that in college.
I don't remember if it's actually from college, but the guy down the street, he gave us a whole bunch of paper, and I bring it in to work, to my classroom.
Oh, okay.
And the kids go crazy with all the
They're like
little
tearing
zip.
off the sides.
Yep.
Zip
They
tear.
They
Some of
don't
them
use
like
the
to chew
paper.
on
They just
it.
like tearing the sides off.
They chew on it.
It's a whole sensory experience.
Fill their cheeks with the torn edges like little chipmunks.
About to
This
make
is
a nest.
fun, Miss Cat.
Yeah. Thanks. I
The 80s were great.
In the 80s, thinking about basic language got me thinking about my Uncle Chuck, who was my godfather, who was a programmer in the 1980s. And he would take me to work sometimes and show me. And they had like, it wasn't like a Cray computer, but they had a room of these giant, processing computers. And the discs they used were like 10-inch floppy disks, like these giant.
Oh, yeah.
They were so impressive to me. But I remember him taking me aside and saying, you got to learn computer programming because that's the future. You're going to make a fortune. And of course, I wanted to be an actor.
But you said no.
I did. I did learn basic, like you said, Kat. He gave me books and I would do stuff. We had our programming computer. I made some little games that were so terrible, but that, was there something less than 8-bit, John? Is there a 2-bit game I could have made? Because it was worth 2 bits.
Yeah, just a plain old 6502 with like the old Atari 2600, which basically didn't even have sprites. It literally, you had to scan where were you on the screen and turn that, make it this color at this moment because I know where the gun of the TV is. It's like insanity back then.
Yeah, I had my first computer was a Texas Instrument 994A. I think we had sprites in a sense. They didn't call it sprites, but I think there was an 8x8 image that you could create.
They might have called them players back then, like player and missile or something like that.
I wanted a computer that did sprites because weren't they 16 by 16 or something like that?
What's a sprite?
A little fairy.
Have wings.
Like a twink?
Like a twink. Exactly.
Kind of, yeah.
Do I have to Google this now?
Oh,
do not Google twink. Sprite's okay.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? What is a sprite?
I don't know that it's worth it. I mean, no one's listening to the show anymore. We could just, since we're talking privately, we could just talk privately and not record it.
You can cut this out.
I'll give you a more in-depth tutorial later when this doesn't make Will mad.
Fuck it down.
We're trying to get this over with.
What do you hear on
Fuck
Christmas
the show.
songs
Fuck the
coming
show.
up? Okay, hey, another 1980s news. There's a new book by author Richard Martin coming out. I thought this was interesting for a number of different reasons, including the fact that this is the first book he's ever published at 77 years of age.
That's amazing.
So you're saying there's a chance.
Yes, there is.
Okay, boomer.
So years ago, Martin read a story about a minister who climbed a flagpole to preach to the masses below. Martin was struck by the notion, including the fact that the minister's wife was running a small restaurant under the pole while her husband carried out his mission above. Unfortunately, the pole was blown down by the California winds after just a few days, and the preacher wound up in the hospital with a broken leg and no converts.
And no converts, by the way. That's the worst part of it.
Well, I mean, yeah. He's like, God will help us and protect. Holy shit!
Not my pole.
This is so curious, this little story.
So Martin looked up the number of the restaurant, called the man's wife, and he asked her if her husband would go up and try again. And she said, not if I have anything to do about it.
It's a perfect wife answer.
And at that, Martin's imagination was off to the races, eventually creating Oranges for Magellan, this novel that I mentioned to you guys. And not only is this his first novel, but he's got 3 more novels now waiting in the wings.
Wow.
In this story, his protagonist, Joe Magellan, climbs a pole in early spring 1981, which is one of the reasons I bring this up, determined to live on a 10 by 10 redwood platform at the top until he breaks the current world record of 440 days, held by his hero/nemesis, Walter Shipwreck Blake. And 70 feet below Joe is his artist wife Clover and young son Nate, hoping to turn their tawdry cafe into a successful venture. So you can see how it's inspired by this actual story. What caught my eye about this, in addition to the fact that it was set in 1981, is the way this story was titled was something to the effect of, harkens back to that pole-sitting craze of the 1980s, which got me thinking, like, were people sitting on poles?
Ouch.
And what does that even mean?
What? Yeah, I need to know about this.
I don't associate it with the 80s, but I do remember the pole sitting craze. I always associated it more with like the 40s for some reason. I don't know why. But yeah, like people, like they would scamper up a telephone pole that's, what at the top is like a dinner plate, like it's 8 inches circumference or something.
Well, that's better than
they would just,
what I was thinking.
Right. No, it's not like you took off your bicycle seat. I mean, we're talking, there's a little platform up there. Okay. and they would try to stay balanced up there by not letting any part of them go below the top of the pole. And I don't think of like, oh, those 80s fads like Pac-Man, the Rubik's Cube, and pole sitting. I don't see it as necessarily kind of iconic of the 80s, but I remember it.
We do have a clip of John taking off his bite suit.
Oh! Ow! 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 Ow!
Line by 7 strides.
Oh! Ooh! Oh!
So apparently he will do anything for money.
That's the next YouTube challenge.
Oh my goodness.
I am there, Cat. Let's start a fund. He's got to pedal around his house. No feet.
It's a little clown bicycle.
Oh! Ow! 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 Ow!
Oh, broken cat
By
again.
7 strides.
Just tell her about the code.
Oh.
John, quick.
Oh!
Line 10, start. Line 20.
Oh, go to 10. Oh, mind blown.
But I did Google this because I was like, this wasn't a 1980s thing. And you're right, John. It actually began decades earlier. But there was a gentleman in 1984, H. David Werder, who temporarily and unofficially set a world record for pole sitting. He lived in a capsule made of plywood and giant cable spools atop a 30-foot pole in front of an appliance store in, guess what state this is? Like, what state would you imagine this would happen in?
I expect it's my home state.
Florida, yes.
Yeah, of
In
course.
Clearwater,
Yeah.
Florida.
Oh, yeah.
At the time, the property was owned by Jersey Jim Towers Sr. It was a giant electronic appliance store that's since moved from the site. The owner thought it would be a pretty good publicity to allow him to do it there. Well, this got me thinking about this guy trying to break a record. Once again,
It's time to play.
In Philadelphia, it's worth $50.
We're going to determine, so you got maybe a little bit of a clue because in the novel, at least, the world record at the time is 444 days. How many days do you think H. David Werder sat atop this 30-foot pole in 1984? Closest without going over gets it. Gets the, wins an NFT. I'm going to scribble on a napkin and take a picture of it.
Thank you. It can only increase in value. So I'll bid first, Cat, and then you can go higher and lower. So
Go $1.
Okay.
Good. You're just going $1 right
One
here.
day over.
I've tried pulling that
One
before.
day.
I'm not allowed to
Like,
anymore.
I'm just going to, I have no idea. I'm going to spitball
can't.
that.
You can't.
I'm going to spitball that he did not make it the year, though he tried. So I'm going to say he went 350 days.
Okay.
I'm going to go a little higher. I'm going to say 380.
H. David Werder sat atop that pole for 439 days, 11 hours, and 6 minutes.
There you go.
Wow.
Cat wins.
Yeah. Okay, great.
They didn't go over.
Okay. All right, here's part 2 of the game.
Oh.
Okay. So while he was up there, he had someone who referred to himself as his ground man. It was a guy that would, using a bucket, bring food, have him hoist food up to him. He also supplied him with water for drinking and bathing. He also would, when Werder would lower his pickle jar down, his ground man would empty it.
Pickle jar.
There weren't pickles in it. There weren't pickles in it.
Pickle jar.
It was a pickle jar once.
Man.
Okay, but according to his ground man, approximately how many showers did he take during his 439-day stint?
Showers?
How many times did he bathe over the course of 439 days?
Just pictured the guy like aiming the hose.
Not 30. No, he hoisted the hose up. He's not trying
A
to hit
little
him.
to the left. Down now.
Yeah. Get in the crevices. Are you using it on jet? Dude.
I'm gonna.
I just imagine the guy brings a power washer one day. Just blasts his nuts right off.
Better now? You picky
All
bastard.
right.
You're good for
sorry.
3 weeks at least.
Yeah, that'll clean the crevices.
All right, Cat.
I'm gonna say, how about 50 times?
Okay. John, what do you think?
$1.
One time. John thinks he showered
One time.
John is
I was
showered
thinking
one
like the
time.
10 range.
Okay.
Was it literally one time? No.
Literally?
No, you're
What?
actually, John, you're still closer. He showered for, according to his groundman here, for approximately 20 times, maybe.
20.
he said.
Okay.
Only 20.
Yeah. 10 was going to be my guess, except you went much higher than my guess, so I did $1. So,
Yep.
so we're tied. We're tied, Cat. We can share this victory.
We are.
Werder's, he vowed to, look, this guy had no interest in coming down, right? Because he vowed to stay up there until the price of gasoline went down to 50 cents, which you say, okay, well, maybe he's trying to make a point. But he had a list. He had a list of things he wanted. He also wanted there to be peace in the Middle East. He wasn't coming
Really?
down also until the federal government raised the speed limit to 65 miles per hour. until all POWs and MIAs were accounted for in Vietnam, and until Tampa got the Super Bowl. Well,
wow. he his wish list there, all hinging upon whether he stayed on the pole or not. It's fascinating.
Well, you'll never guess which of those became true, but the Super Bowl came to Tampa. And so even though the owner of the store had ignored Werder for a year, he started getting pressure from City Hall to get him down. Since the Super Bowl was coming, the city commission did not want the pole sitter blemishing a primary gateway to the beaches.
He's an attraction. That's not a blemish. Come on.
Have you seen Clearwater?
That's right.
In 1984.
This is a great thing. You should put up a sign. Home of the pole sitter.
The pole sitter.
The city limits.
Did this guy have a nickname? He needs a nickname.
I don't know that he did. So the city commissioners ordered the police chief to do something. Eventually, Towers, the owner of the property there, had his lawyer drop an eviction notice. And 8 days before they forced Warner down, they left the eviction notice down in the bucket of the pole, but he would not pull it up. Nope. He was only sending the pickle jar down.
I was going to say, stop accepting the pickle jar and he'll come down real fast.
I don't know.
These pickles are piling up here.
It's the imagery that you paint. Oh my God.
Some's got to give. Pickles are everywhere.
This isn't a load-bearing pole.
That was so bad.
Eventually, the police chief went up to Werder's capsule on a fire department cherry picker.
Oh.
He, along with the captain of the police, pleaded with Werder and got absolutely nowhere. Then, out of frustration, the police chief said, "I'm really freezing my ass off here." And finally, for some reason, that motivated Werder to come down.
Really?
Yeah.
The police chief saying he was freezing.
That and he came up with a power drill. He was going to start taking the bolts out.
Oh, John! There's more to this story. There's more to this story, including the fact that at one point some drunk guy tried to climbed the pole and tried to get up on the platform.
Oh.
And when he reached the platform, Werder started hitting his hands with a hammer until the guy let go.
Jeez.
And that guy was taken to jail. And some other guys that were visiting from Connecticut stumbled out of a nearby bar, drunk, begged him to come down. When he wouldn't, they started removing the bolts. And,
really?
Yeah. And
I just made that up.
Yeah. No.
Oh my goodness.
Oh.
And he threw something at them until he was able to get them to go away. I can't remember what it was.
Pickles!
Pickles! We know what he was throwing at.
Look out below!
You were warned.
Pickles incoming.
That's assault, brother. But he was able to. They were able to chase them away before they removed enough bolts for the pole to come down. But Werder does say that at some point he does feel like he was in danger of his life at that moment. And then his ground man cemented the bolts so they couldn't be removed.
Oh, his ground man.
The pickle man. All right. Hey,
was that like his best friend?
No, it was just a
ground
dude.
Just the dude.
No. We're going on way too long about this. I realize we're talking for like over a half hour on this. Probably just one thing right. Like,
It's the best part of the show.
You keep bringing this
What are
up.
you talking about?
So his ground man, who was the owner of the property is named Jim Towers. His ground name is named Ben Towers. No relation, but Ben. When he heard the police were coming, in an effort to keep the police at bay, he started a rumor that Werder was armed, and before he came down, he would start shooting. He was supposedly trying to help Werder. So instead, what the police showed up was a bunch of sharpshooters that they had on roofs around, ready to take this guy out. And the police chief said if Werder hadn't come down, they were just going to cut the pole down.
Don't shoot till you see the corn and the pickles.
Oh,
no.
Brought to you by Del Monte.
Del Monte.
All right.
Well,
Hey,
you were hoping that these would be discussion points.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It worked.
I should mention, I brought that all up because
Careful what you ask for.
Don't forget, we're talking about, I'm sure he's going to love this, author Richard Martin's book, Oranges for Magellan, and not pickles, Oranges for Magellan, will be launched by Regal House Publishing on December 13th.
Yes.
Maybe he could work some of these things into it. this new story.
Yeah.
It'll
He has
give them ideas.
two sequels coming.
Yeah, you got to step up your game.
Yes.
Something,
Yes.
this time the pickles are personal. So, you got some kind of clever thing.
Pickles for Mad Magellan.
Power washing.
Oh.
Figure in there somehow.
Oh, yeah.
In other 1980s news, per Deadline, Mike Flanagan and Trevor Macy reveal that a Dark Tower adaptation is in the works. I know what you're saying. Haven't we had one? Yeah, we did recently, but
At least. Yeah.
we'll talk about that in a moment. But after 6 years of creating and producing for Netflix, the duo behind The Haunting TV franchise and Midnight Mass, I absolutely love Midnight Mass. I did not watch any of The Hauntings, although I have friends that keep telling me to watch them.
It's great. Yeah.
But Midnight Mass is, I loved Midnight Mass. A little talky, but such great concepts in there. It's really smart writing. But anyway, so they're moving now from Netflix to Amazon Studios, and one of the things they're taking with them is their screen adaptation of Stephen King's Dark Tower, which creator Flanagan envisions as a TV series to run for 5 seasons, followed by 2 standalone features. Wow. That's,
Hubris much? Holy crap.
That's, yeah.
Wow.
They'll undoubtedly
Yeah,
be
good.
canceled after 2 seasons, though, right?
Yeah. Good luck finishing season 1, right? With that kind of confidence.
Well, on Netflix,
I mean-
that's what would happen. Netflix cancels
I
shows
know,
when they're
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
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 I mean, they did a good pedigree. I mean, if anybody can do it well, the guys that did The Haunting, I can
Yeah.
see doing well with Dark Tower, I suppose. But just saying, it's going to be 5 seasons and 2 films, and then we'll be rich. And that's the outline. Just green light, please.
Well, in an interview with Deadline, Flanagan and Macy, who are known for their extensive film and TV work in the horror genre, broke the news that they acquired the rights to the Mammoth book series. Now, fans of this series, if you're familiar with it at all, you know it began with its first volume, The Gunslinger, which was published in 1982. It joined actually together 5 short stories that King had published between the years 78 and 81. But then from that, he went on to produce or publish rather a total of 8 novels in this story, drawing from multiple genres: dark fantasy, science fantasy, horror, and of course, Westerns. Flanagan revealed that he has written a pilot script and season outlines for The Dark Tower, which he described has been his dream project. Now, as I mentioned, you probably remember, they've been trying to make this thing into a series, into movies for a while now. They managed to get one movie done in 2017 starring Idris Elba and Matthew McConaughey. I never saw it. I was excited about it, but I heard it wasn't so fantastic, so I just avoided it. But I also didn't read. I also
Same.
didn't read the books though either, though.
It's the pedigree of Stephen King that has me interested in this story at all.
Well, it's supposed to be fantastic, and just the idea that it melding these different genres together, many of them that I love, like fantasy and a Western, that's cool already, you know?
Yeah.
But as we mentioned, these guys are good at what they do. Among the many things that they've done together include some other Stephen King adaptations, like 2019's sequel to The Shining, Doctor Sleep, which
right.
Flanagan actually wrote and directed.
Oh, did he? Okay.
I love that movie. That movie's great,
Is it?
I think. All right, and finally, another 1980s news, one other bit of movie news here, also per Deadline. Ghostbusters Afterlife sequel taps Gil Kenan, I'm going to say. Kenan?
That sounds right.
Kenan or Kenan? To direct with the previous cast returning. So the question is, do we need a Reitman to direct this for it to be good, I guess?
Well, but he's still involved. He's just not directing. So it's not like he's jumped ship, right? We're still going to have a Reitman, in the head office at least,
They're
right?
swapping roles, right?
Well, Kenan or Keenan, one of those guys, Kenan. I'm going to say Kenan because I think there's only one E in it. Kenan. Kenan actually co-wrote Afterlife with Jason Reitman, so and also executive produced it with him. So yeah, in a sense, there's just one little change there that he's going to become the director of the film instead of Reitman. Yeah,
And Reitman's going to be a producer.
yeah, and they're co-writing it together still.
There's a Venn diagram there.
I guess to John's point,
Yeah.
not much has changed.
It doesn't worry me too much. I mean, they captured the spirit, no pun intended, of Ghostbusters pretty well with Afterlife, I think. And
Oh,
yeah,
Yeah.
I wish I'd planned that. That was clever, but I didn't. But I mean, I trust those guys going forward. So they're swapping chairs. No big deal. I think
Well,
it's gonna
not
be
much
fine.
is
I'm
known
excited
about
for
the
it.
sequel. Sources say the plan is to return to New York City and the iconic firehouse made famous in the original Ghostbusters films. Now, that's kind of tied to how the ending is, right? Because
yes.
Winston's got like a lot of money and he's fixing up the firehouse again.
Right. It appears he purchased the firehouse or is renovating it or both or something. Yeah.
And I remember when we talked, around the time we talked to Ernie Hudson, I think there was talk of it being a series, that he was going to head up maybe a series, but maybe those rumors were actually confabulating the fact that he was heading up the Quantum Leap series.
Oh, gotcha.
Which he had to have shot or some amount of it by then, I would think. Well, maybe not shot, but maybe he had the deal by then.
Right.
Regarding his new gig, Kennan said it's an absolute honor to pick up the proton pack and step behind the cameras for the next chapter. For the next chapter of the Spengler family saga. I just wish I could go back to 1984 and tell that guy to get off that goddamn pole. That's weird. A weird crossover there. He said, the first part's true. I just wish I could go back to 1984 and tell the kid in the 6th row of the Man Valley West that one day he was going to get to direct a Ghostbusters film. Holy cow, right?
How cool is that? That's awesome. Yeah, that's
it's mind blowing. Yeah. I love that.
I can't say I've seen any of Kennan's other films. He's directed Monster House, City of Ember, and last year's A Boy Called Christmas.
Seen Monster House?
Yeah, you see that?
Yeah, it's kind of a kids animated show. I think is the one I'm thinking of. My daughter really enjoys, so he directed that, and that's one she watches over and over. So it's got staying power. So that's good news.
Is that right?
You know, I sometimes think to myself, I wish I could have told that 18-year-old in the Hall of Sciences that someday she'd be co-hosting a podcast.
In the Hall of Sciences?
I don't know. I'm trying to think of the name of a building.
Of
Yes, the tall. Well, yeah, that would have been more.
You know, this guy's hair I'm cutting. One day I'm going to host a podcast with him. I don't know what that is.
What's a podcast?
But first,
mind-blowing.
Between now and then, I'm not going to talk to him for 30 years.
At all.
And then we'll become great friends.
Yes.
And Cat would be, but what's a podcast? Well, it's like radio on the internet. But what's an internet?
Oh, crap.
It's like, never mind. You'll figure it out.
You know what? You do something else with somebody else. All right? I can't only take you so far. Fuck this show. That was Will traveling from the future. Not to be confused with future Robert.
Totally different.
All right. Hey, on that note, that was 19... Oh, shit.
Oops.
See, it doesn't... I hate this board
This show.
I thought I was getting the whole show without getting buzzed.
Hey. That was 1980s news. Aren't you glad? Hey, our independent podcast is brought to you every week by folks just like you. So if you'd like to help us out, please follow us on the podcast platform you're listening to right now. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Share an episode on Facebook. All of these actions just take a moment and are 100% free. But if you'd like to chuck in a buck and help us keep publishing the show week after week, please visit us at 1980snow.com/support to find out how you can send us $1 or $2. And thank you so much. It means a lot. Hey, in a moment, I know it seemed like a lifetime for John and Kat, but in a moment, for everybody else, I'm going to speak with John Walsh. You guys are going to hear me talk to John Walsh. Great guy, super knowledgeable, just a really cool job to have, among the many jobs he does. But like I mentioned, we're going to talk about Doctor Who, these two particular films from the 1960s. He and I go on an adventure where we, journey rather, where we talk about, much like Doctor Who, we talk about the 1980s and some other years. But the 1980s, of course, because for me, Doctor Who has a certain significance. You can save it for when I talk to him. And it may be for you too, because it turns out Doctor Who wasn't particularly really big in the U.S. in the 1980s. And John gave me some stat about that, but I don't remember. He'll tell you. But I'm wondering if you guys have you ever watched Doctor Who? Do you like Doctor Who? Doctor Who? Are you asking that as a question right now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've certainly watched I would say my fair share, but no more of Doctor Who. I've seen plenty of it. Yeah. Like I can name 4 or 5 doctors for you. My roommate and lifelong friend, Jason, is just what do they call him? A Whovian, a Whovaholic. I don't know what they're called, but yeah, I mean, he introduced it to me in college, which was like 89 or 90 or so when we were in college. And, and we're going back watching the old stuff with John Pertwee and like some of the black and white stuff even. And
wow, okay.
While I appreciate it, I found that it moved too slowly for what I was expecting out of modern media, but I appreciate it. And I can see why it's popular.
Yeah.
What about you, Kat?
Well, I'm not certain that I've ever seen a whole episode. Okay. I'm sure I've seen parts of it. I remember being very aware of Doctor Who in the 80s because some of my family members were into it and they talked about it. So I've heard the Daleks and the TARDIS and Exterminate. Yeah, Terminate. So... Is that it? Terminate or exterminate? Wait.
Exterminate.
Actually, Kat, it's exterminate, not terminate.
Thank you, Robert. So I'm familiar with it, but it's not any sort of passion of mine. But it's just always been running in the background of my life.
I remember, and again, I think, look, John's going to explain it. I'm trying to talk off the top of my head here, but I remember that it was introduced. Maybe we got I think we got the reruns in the 80s for the first time in the U.S. And so it became huge. So for us, even though he was the like mid to or late 70s, just a touch into the 80s Doctor Who. He was my Doctor Who, Tom Baker. Wore the giant scarf.
Sure.
Anyway, he was my doctor, and I don't remember how I could catch episodes regularly, or if they were even shown in order. But I think they were on like a UHF channel or something, because we were getting BBC program. We've talked about watching Monty Python before, and
What about PBS?
I don't think it was
Might have been,
on
yeah.
PBS, but maybe it was. Yeah, it could have been.
And as I
PBS.
recall, it was serialized here in the U.S. because initially they're like 2.5 hour long stories that they chopped up into serialized episodes that stopped at inexplicable places to do.
Oh my gosh!
To go see the 30 minutes the next day and 30 minutes the next day, and so
I remember that.
could be hard to watch that. Yeah, it was like they were like movies in the UK. You had to watch them like ran all afternoon. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, and certainly there are the movies, because we're going to talk to John about those too. But yeah, I just remember being like, my imagination just being so, I don't know, sort of on fire, because these, by then, by the time I had seen these, I'm certain I had seen A New Hope, for example, and Disney's The Black Hole, which, and those were movies for me, sci-fi movies that really just, I remember them just really feeling like, I don't know, inspired to go on these sci-fi adventures, that I never could. But Doctor Who was this one that was like, anything could happen. This show's like bonkers in like the best possible way. Like those felt on rails compared to that show. And that was something that made it, I don't know, even more fun to watch.
Wow.
Anyway, and of course it had time travel. And it may be why I love time travel, because that was probably I can't think of anything earlier than that I'd seen, I think.
That might have been the first.
Certainly a selling point. That was my problem with Doctor Who, is he didn't time travel enough. Like, keep doing it the whole episode. and it makes sense in hindsight now. It wasn't until probably 10 years ago that I learned that they initially were much longer episodes. So you could go a whole, like, it's Tuesday and no time travel. Well, because he just did it earlier in the long movie. But in that day, he might not time travel at all. I'm like, why are we doing the cool stuff? Well, because it's a little exposition heavy, because I got to fill 2.5 hours with one story. But yeah.
Very cool. Huh. Wish I had talked to you guys before we did the interview, like it usually works out. Now this is whatever. Anyway, hey, look, there's a place where we could look, find out all about this, and it's John's book, Doctor Who and the Daleks, the official story of the films. Folks in the U.S., it'll be available in just a little while. You can pre-order it everywhere books are available right now, and if you're in the U.K., you can get it right now. Lucky you. Okay, hey, we'll be back in just a moment with our guest, John Walsh.
I'm from the future. I came here in a time machine that you invented. Now I need your help to get back to the year 1980. Do you know what this means? It means that this damn thing doesn't work.
Our guest today is a double BAFTA-nominated filmmaker and an award-nominated author. Prior to his latest book, our guest published 2 revelatory books about 1980s fan-favorite films, Flash Gordon and Escape from New York. Both books are the official stories of their respective films, created for the studio that currently owns their rights. This month, our guest will publish Doctor Who and the Daleks, the official story of the films. It tells the fascinating behind-the-scenes story of the 2 1960s big-screen adaptations of the world-renowned TV show. The book is available everywhere for pre-order, including from our favorite store, bookshop.org. Please welcome to the show, John Walsh.
Hey, Will, great to be back. Thanks for having me back.
Likewise, so very excited. And I've got to say, I am so impressed with the how you're able to create these books, it seems like, with such regularity and still have them be as information packed, have so many goodies, as far as behind the scenes and photographs from the, contemporaneous photographs. I don't know how you find the time to do it.
Well, the thing is, Will, I treat this like a documentary. So instead of the end product being a program for TV or for a cinema release, it's in paper form. So I'd attack it in the same way. Who are the contributors I want to speak to? What are the questions that are still unanswered about these various films?
No.
You know, Flash Gordon had 3 times or nearly 4 times the budget of Star Wars. So why was there no complex special effects in there? Because it was filmed 2 or 3 years later than Star Wars. So these questions kind of kicked around in my head for years when I should have been learning at school and at college and getting a career in something much more established. Right. No, it was still going around in my head. Why did they not use this optic system on Flash Gordon when they used it on Superman the movie? They had the money.
Yeah.
So for Doctor Who and the Daleks from 1965 and the sequel, Daleks Invasion of Earth 2150 AD, gosh, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
I had a bigger challenge because the films are older and they were made on a much smaller budget. In fact, this film pairing is the lowest budget films I've ever written about in one of these big coffee table art books. So getting high quality images and new images, which for films from the 60s is kind of a big ask, and to find out the stories when many of the key players are no longer with us.
Right.
It was quite the task, but I'm a big Doctor Who fan, big Doctor Who fan. So it was kind of like a poison chalice in a way, because people have asked me before, is that a good thing that you're a big Doctor Who fan, you're doing this book? And generally speaking, it can be not a good thing, because your inner geek can kind of trap you and make you shoot off into different directions.
Right.
And so you have to be quite kind of controlled about it.
Yeah,
so people who pick this book up who know the film will be like, well, I know that. I've seen that before. But there'll be lots of people who maybe are fans of Peter Cushing and don't know the film, or are fans of new Doctor Who and are looking back at this as old Doctor Who. So you have to tell the whole story.
Right.
And because it's officially licensed by Studio Canal, who own the film now, it has to be the right story. So I had access to their full archives for the very first time, which was great.
Yeah, and it's pretty, you mentioned about, again, having the access, having the photographs. There was a bit of time travel magic done because the quality of the photos, and as I understand, they were restored somewhat, you would never know it. I mean, there's some of these images of Peter Cushing that I would swear were taken yesterday, that really just transports you to that time, and at the same time seems so contemporary. It's really fantastic and surreal at the same time.
But I wanted to do effectively a 4K, if you like, or an 8K book. When you think of your favorite films that have been restored, the thing you're most looking for is perhaps good sound and so on, but you want to see it in such pin sharp accuracy that you can almost touch those people. So whether it's a reissue of Star Wars or Star Trek, the original movie series has come out now in 4K, which is very exciting. But these films, they came out in 4K, and because they'd been shot on Techniscope, which is the poor man's cinemascope, then it was sometimes a double-edged sword, because it might actually belie the lower budgets, and you might see the seams and everything and so on. But actually it made the film really fizzle and come alive. So for the book, I felt if they've done that for the film, we need to make sure the book is going to be to that standard, and also find things that Studio Canal don't own and go beyond their archive, which is beautiful and wonderfully restored. And because I'm a fan, I know which pictures have been printed before. So if we're printing them again, we're going to print them wider so you can see more of the edges, or we're going to print alternative pictures. And some have been beautifully restored, as you say, stunningly so. And, Titan Books have done a wonderful layout where those crown jewels of the book, if I can call them that, really pop.
Right. Now, I've got to confess, I am I think the latter category that you described, as far as folks who, fans of Peter Cushing, even a fan, again, I'll be honest with you, a limited fan of Doctor Who, the series, and I'll explain that in just a moment, but not familiar with the films. And I guess, and that's for me, but I guess I should say that, and I say all that to say that my love of the Doctor, though, was kind of surprising and happenstance, because when I was a kid growing up in the 70s and 80s, my dad and I, most of our relationship was watching TV, and somehow I want to say it was public broadcasting. So I know some shows we would find on the UHF channel, but I think the BBC shows were on public broadcasting here in the US. And we watched 3 shows. It was Monty Python, Fawlty Towers from the BBC, Fawlty Towers, and Doctor Who. And at that time it was Tom Baker the fourth Doctor, who, as you know, carried us through the 70s and just barely into the 1980s. But he was my doctor and probably my primer, for time travel science fiction, which got me ready for the movies of the late 70s and early 80s that, I have now a lifelong love of time travel films and shows that I believe started then. I'm not sure how or whether to what extent it was popular in the 1980s that a kid, in Jersey City, New Jersey would discover it. Do you have any sense of that?
I do, and to give people a potted history, because people always think Doctor Who was only big in America in the 80s, and that's when it was first shown. But I mean, it was shown as far back as 1965 in Canada, which, although people in America don't consider that America, people in Europe think of that as North America.
Yes.
And in the 70s, that's when United States first got Doctor Who in 1972 with Time Life Television. And they had syndicated episodes of John Pertwee. But it really wasn't until the 80s, as you say, and PBS started to rerun the color programs. So that would be the John Pertwee episodes and, of course, all the Tom Baker ones. And then into the 80s, there was a selection of different Doctors. But 1983 was the high watermark because it was the 20th anniversary. The 5 Doctors, which was like a feature film, which kind of had all the 5 Doctors in it. Although the first Doctor had died, so he was a lookalike. The 4th Doctor didn't appear, so they used archive footage. And for the press call, they used a dummy from Madame Tussauds and the lineup with the other Doctors.
Is that right?
You could never do that now. You can't imagine making an Avengers assemble and one of them doesn't turn up and you get like that'll do, Madame Tussauds, if only. So for viewers in the United States, definitely the 1980s, definitely PBS, and definitely the colour Doctors. So Pertwee, Baker especially, and then Peter Davidson would be your brand new episodes in the early 80s.
Right.
And, a much younger Doctor, and much more what we expect today when we see modern Doctor Who.
Right.
But the interesting thing about the Peter Cushing films is Peter Cushing is playing a screen version of the first Doctor, because Doctor Who famously regenerates when they want to get a new actor and there's a change of personnel and so on, like a new president or a new monarch. You get a whole new face and you accept them in that part. So whether it's Roger Moore as James Bond or Pierce Brosnan or Timothy Dalton. But in 1965, when the first film was shot, Doctor Who had been on TV for a couple of years, but they'd only had the original Doctor, William Hartnell, who played it older. He was only in his 50s, but he played it as a much older man, sort of Victorian gentleman. And then in 1966, when they made the next film, William Hartnell was still the TV Doctor. But by the end of 66, they came up with this regeneration trick, and Pat Troughton became the second Doctor. Now, Peter Cushing was slightly frustrated because had he known, I didn't have to do a kind of if you want to call it a karaoke version of William Hartnell. I could have done my own Doctor. He might have done something very different. Right. And later in the 70s with the same producer, Milton Subotsky, who was from America, who produced these Doctor Who movies. He did At the Earth's Core, or Journey to the Earth's Core, where he played a very kind of Doctor Who-ish style character. But regeneration hadn't been invented then. The big selling point for these movies was it was in colour, because nobody had a colour TV set in the UK. Doctor Who was not in colour. The Daleks were not in colour. So come and see them in widescreen, in colour, in your cinema. Yep. And both films were outrageous successes. And we go into that in the book because there's some politics around that. And also there's a bit of awkwardness between the BBC, who we know is the home of Doctor Who, and these movies, which were licensed by the BBC at the time to be made, but now exist commercially separately, and are two very different satellites that move around in the Doctor Who universe. And so up until this book, because this is not a BBC Enterprises book, the two Doctors, the original two Doctors, Peter Cushing, if you will, the movie Doctor, and the TV Doctor, William Hartnell, were not allowed to be on the same pages or in the same product, or there'd never been a book before. Right. And there was lots of consternation about, should we do a book? And if there's going to be trouble, let's get John Walsh in because he likes trouble.
Right.
So, exactly. Yeah. And I don't even look like E Majors, not even from a distance. So we were delighted the BBC worked with us on this. And we have William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton on the same page. And for casual viewers, they might think, so what? But for Doctor Who fans, it's quite the moment. So I'm expecting the kind of Nobel Peace Prize people to ring me at any moment with a sash or a tiara or something.
Only if I guess you bridge the different camps, because, well, I guess even before that, though, I'm curious. It seems like such a contemporary move to take something that's, popular on television and say, hey, let's put it on film. And change it, again, we'll take what works and we'll take the liberties to tinker with it. We don't care. But was it simply the idea that maybe they could, again, a contemporary notion, we could leverage that. And again, more spectacle, color, bigger, that was enough for them to motivate them to put it on screen?
Yes, absolutely. Milton Subotsky, who was quite an ingenious American producer. Yeah. And I was very keen to write this book because Milton Subotsky is not a well-known name. He's not Dino De Laurentiis. He's not David O. Selznick. He's not one of those names that we often associate with Hollywood movies or making these genre-breaking exercises. He made these 2 films. He made lots of the Doug McClure films, The Journey to the Center of the Earth, The Land That Time Forgot. Mm-hmm. He was the producer of The Martian Chronicles with Rock Hudson in the early 80s. I'm a big fan of that. But significantly, he was the first producer on this planet to option a new young horror writer, Stephen King. So Milton Subotsky, who's, I think, an unsung hero in this entire enterprise, saw something here that Doctor Who could work on the big screen, and it did. And he had lots of naysayers who were like, well, no one's going to come out of their lovely, cozy homes to see it in colour. And pay how much? Right. You can see it on the television with your TV license already paid for, with the proper doctor. And it's like, well, he was right. And after he opened this sort of floodgate, there had been other cinema and TV adaptations before. But by the mid-1970s, British cinema was full of it. And kind of sitcoms that we wouldn't allow now on television because of their content were up in the big screen and having movie versions. On the Buses, the movie, which was about bus drivers and conductors, made more money in the UK than Diamonds Are Forever, the James Bond reboot with Sean Connery in the early 70s. So it was big business because people recognized the brand. And even now, Hollywood will do a live action version of a favorite animated classic. But if you know that Pinocchio, then have this one too. And have another one on Netflix as well while you're at it. Yeah. So it's kind of, and I'm sure they're all going to be fine, but it overcomes the burden of having to explain to people what content is. Milton Subotsky, I think, doesn't get really the credit he should for that. And he was really quite the genius.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of him. And of course, all the films you mentioned, and of course, the films he did produced for Stephen King, I'm fans of and familiar with. So it was quite a learning opportunity for me to learn of his role in bringing it Doctor Who to the screen. And wasn't it something like he paid like £500 for the licensing rights?
Yeah, it was a tiny amount of money. And interestingly, one person who did very well out of it was Terry Nation, who was the creator of the Daleks for television. He became a bona fide millionaire. And so you can imagine in the 1960s being a millionaire in the UK. That's the equivalent almost of being a billionaire today, you can imagine. Unfortunately, there's not much in the UK to spend your money on in the 1960s. So other than just stroking the money at night time before you go to sleep, I'm not sure what much fun you get out.
Yeah, I was curious. Yeah, it strikes to me that, you mentioned Terry Nation. In the 1960s, it seems like he was doing what George Lucas was then, lauded for accomplishing in the 1970s, which was holding on to the rights of this thing he created, in particular in merchandising, so that as they start generating Dalek toys, the cash starts rolling in. And to date, his estate still has the rights to approve anything that involves the Daleks. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes, and it's quite unusual, but the whole setup of Doctor Who was unusual at the time because in-house writers kind of refused to write for the show. A new producer came over from Canada, Sidney Newman, who wanted to do a new evening tea time show for families. And as the BBC was at the time, it isn't any longer, they were quite put out that this outsider, this foreigner from Canada, had come over to tell us how to make drama on television. We know what we're doing. So as a result, he became quite isolated. So the choice of production personnel and creatives were all outside from the BBC. And Terry Nation was working with British comedian Tony Hancock at the time. And Terry wasn't really interested in doing Doctor Who. But Tony Hancock was having a big drinking problem. The show he was doing went badly. He'd already turned down Doctor Who. And then when he was more or less fired after having a big row with Hancock on the set of his ITV show, he rang up the BBC and said, all right, I'll do it then, because I have a wife and 2 children. I have to pay the mortgage somehow. What is it you want? They said, 6 episodes, one set in a kind of an outer space thing, and we want it with sort of aliens or robots or something. And they said, oh, okay. And he basically wrote it without any changes, and it became the first Dalek story, and it was just a phenomenal success. And, all of Terry's fortunes changed at that moment when he just, out of, I won't say sheer desperation, but out of frustration, wrote this story. But it was in him, and, he's a creative genius as well. He came up with Blake 7, which I'm a big fan of, that you may have seen on PBS in the 80s. But it is unusual because people who were staff creative at the BBC got no share of the toys and merchandise that followed. But Terry was quite clever about it. He had an agent. They cut him a deal. So anytime you need to do anything with the Daleks, you've got to check in with Terry Nation's people. But this is why it becomes quite awkward with the Doctor Who movie book, because that's owned completely by someone else. Studio Canal, which is now one of the world's biggest film libraries. Of course, produces films like The Railway Children Return and Paddington. So anytime you want to do anything with the movie Daleks in terms of merchandise, whether it's a soundtrack or some figures or toys or this book, then it's always a big to-do. And it's put people off in the past. And it's a shame, really, because I would like to have bought this book 10, 20, maybe 30 years ago. But it's great for me that this didn't happen and I did Flash Gordon or Escape from New York, because it gave me a chance to come along and say, I'll do that. Yeah. And I did.
So, I mentioned a few moments ago how contemporary it seems to adapt a television or any property into a film. And, nowadays, again, it's so common for there to be controversy almost immediately, because you've got the camps of the folks who are the purists and claim that this film adaptation is not exactly like the source material, and other folks who only know the film and therefore become fans of, even the source material then ultimately. When they make this film for this TV show that, is only a couple of years old and is starting to gain popularity, what is the reaction to it?
Well, the reaction from a general audience, let's not say the hardcore fans, the general audience was great. We got to see the Daleks in colour. We like this cast. What should we see next week? But for people like me, and I suspect you will, if you're a major Doctor Who fan, you'll be like, oh, hang on. What was that? Hang on, this guy is an Earthling. Right. He's not from Gallifrey, because on TV he's this complex chameleon character who's stolen the TARDIS, is hiding on Earth, has this granddaughter Susan, and is quite crotchety. And yet the movie version, Milton Subotsky decided to go for a Swiss Family Robinson approach and wanted Peter Cushing to have a wide North American appeal, and changed fundamental aspects so that he became an earthbound human grandfather, created this invention in his back garden, and then decided to test it one night when his older granddaughter's boyfriend happened to turn up with a box of chocolates. And, you can imagine me pitching that to you now. If you're the head of Amazon Prime or Netflix, yes. You'd be saying, can someone get Walsh out of here? So once Milton had the license, Milton wrote this treatment up, this screenplay for it. So he knew exactly what he was doing. Of course, Doctor Who at the time wasn't this revered franchise that's been put on multiple podiums. There was no fan base. There was no organizations to represent fans. But by the 80s, when you were watching Doctor Who on television on PBS, the movies weren't that highly regarded because you just had like one of the best doctors, if not the best doctor, Tom Baker. I've worked with 2 doctors. I've worked with Tom Baker. He did a narration for me at film school for a Harryhausen documentary. Wow. And David Tennant's narrated a film I made about children with disabilities. You can see both on my YouTube channel. To go from Tom Baker and watching his work, which is absolutely superb, and then maybe popping on the movies, you'll be like, oh, it can be a jarring experience because of the style of acting, because of the interpretations from all the actors. But now, as we look back from 2022 perspective, it's considered a bit of a cinema classic. Those fans have softened over the years, And partly it's been because of the new series. Some fans aren't as keen on what's happened in recent Doctor Who developments, and so hark back to everything in the past, including less popular Doctors from the late 80s, and consider them all classics.
Right.
So when, after Peter Davison, you had Colin Baker, then Sylvester McCoy, then the series was cancelled. It was nearly cancelled after Colin Baker in the mid-80s, but then properly cancelled after Sylvester McCoy. He was like the last Doctor standing in the 80s. The critics, fans, everyone thought the last couple of Doctors didn't cut the mustard. Now, those series have been reissued on Blu-ray, and certainly here in the UK and Europe, shoot straight to the top of the charts, ahead of Bond, ahead of Marvel, ahead of Spider-Man, everyone else. And people are rebuying those standard definition shows that have been upscaled for HD for Blu-ray and spending the equivalent of, I suppose, $60 or $70 it would be in US dollars.
Yeah.
For shows they've already got on VHS and DVD. So there is a vast well of love and support for these series. And now Peter Cushing has been swept along with that, quite rightly, I think. And because of that momentum, this book has happened. And just a little bit of trivia about the book. It was meant to come out in September. The entire print run sold out as a pre-sale.
Oh, wow.
So when it went on to Amazon, shot straight to number one. I was like, oh, look, it's got number one, a little sash on it. I've never had that before. And it stayed there and stayed there. And it just got sold out completely. So the book was moved back to end of November now for the UK. I think it's just early December for the US.
Right.
Because it was the first book I did of my 4 books so far that sold out before it got into the shops.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
I'd love to take the credit for that. I'd love people to think it's not because it's Doctor Who, it's because it's John Walsh. Not the most wanted John Walsh, but the other one, the most desired John Walsh.
Well, it's the John Walsh who's written about so many other wonderful, fan favorite science fiction properties so far. So, yeah, they got the momentum. So, and I wonder, though, this new love, I guess newfound love, it seems maybe, or discovery of the Peter Cushing films. Look, early on, like you mentioned, there's so many non-canonical aspects to the film, certainly in the 60s, relative, compared to the television show. Where are we at? Like, how does this fit into the canon, if at all, in today's Doctor Who? Well, interestingly, Stephen Moffat, who was the showrunner and for Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi, and was there for the transformation, the regeneration of Jodie Whittaker, he said that he loves those Doctor Who films. And he recreated the inside of Matt Smith's TARDIS to have the white inner doors that Peter Cushing's TARDIS has on the interior as a slight homage. And when it came to the 50th anniversary back in 2013, he was keen to include the movie Doctor, the Peter Cushing Doctor, in there somewhere, but a deal couldn't be struck. So we talk about what he says in the book. He speaks to us and tells us where he sees Doctor Who fitting, that particular Doctor. And he does come up with a theory about how he is spinning around in the universe, not quite knowing where he's from, or giving a fake story that he's really a human from Earth. So if Stephen Moffat can make the exception and allow Peter Cushing into that universe, I think the fans are thinking, oh, okay, Stephen Moffat has kind of sealed it with his approval. And I think that was really significant when he said that. And, he had no axe to grind there, and he had no reason to say that. There was nothing that he would benefit from doing that. And so he fully embraces that Doctor. So he could fit into that universe. So I can imagine in years to come, a CGI, if you like, Peter Cushing. It won't be the first time. I was going to say, I think I've seen that before, yeah.
In Rogue One, they did it,
right.
Which was spoilers for anyone who still hasn't seen Rogue One.
Yeah.
But the Grand Moff Tarkin turns up there, and it's quite surprising to see him. And I think it's mostly successful. It's good they did that. So I could see Peter Cushing as Doctor Who turning up in a kind of a future Doctor Who. But there was one of the things that actually frustrated people. He introduced himself as Doctor Who. Hello, I'm Doctor Who.
Right.
As if Who was his surname, like Smith or Jones. And of course, he's not ever referred to as Doctor, first name, Who, second name. He's just the Doctor. Right. And Doctor Who is meant to imply who is he. But, a lot of those aspects or quirks are particular to the film. And I think people have not forgiven them, but have allowed them to be part of the overall universe. So the obsession that fans had, which meant, no, it's not canon, don't speak to me. People have come to mellow in their older age, I guess.
Yeah. Whatever makes, ultimately the narrative or, it's just, or there's a possibility that it ultimately enriches the narrative. So yeah, why not let it in? I thought it was interesting how, you point out he goes by Doctor Who, and even the distinction between spelling out doctor instead of abbreviating doctor. I was wondering, I guess, thinking about how many of these things had to do with, Sabatsky being an American and thinking, in sort of more what would appeal to, I guess, an American audience or a North American audience, making these silly distinctions.
I think he's right. Milton was right. Milton was the only person who brought Doctor Who to the cinema screen. And, for years, people have tried to do it. Mm-hmm. There was an Amblin TV version with Paul McGann there in the mid-90s. But that originally was going to be a cinema version. Lots of well-known people have tried to bring it to the big screen. No one has succeeded, only Milton Sabotsky, and he did it twice. Mm. And, right up until today, no one has done it and even got close to it. It's tantalizing. It's quite the poison chalice for many producers who have spent years and lots of their own money in pursuing what's been a folly for them because they've lost money on this.
Mm. That's curious, huh? With such an amazing, huge property, hundreds of episodes of television, hundreds of hours, 100 million fans easily around the world, that they wouldn't be able to figure that out. And maybe thank goodness, because, again, to the point of sort of it being a contemporary thing, I don't know. I don't know that it would necessarily be as successful as they were in the 1960s doing this because of social media in particular, maybe because of how ravenous people could be, equally in favor and against something, maybe killing an incarnation of it on screen today that wouldn't stand the chance and have the opportunity for the legs that this, 60s films did.
Absolutely. I mean, plus because it's so successful, because it's a multi-million-pound franchise, people are very tentative about the moves they make. Milton got a great deal at a great time. Yep. He did well out of it. Terry Nation did well out of it. The BBC, less so. So maybe it was they felt chastened by the fact that someone else went off with one of their properties and did very well. Thank you very much. Meanwhile, the license fee payer, which is the great British public, didn't really get to see much back from that success. And yet it had been grown and nurtured in the garden that is the BBC, but then plucked away by a usurper from another country, an American, if you don't mind. And
a Yank.
Absolutely. And made money from it. So, it's the more successful something is, sometimes the harder it is to do something with it. Ray Harryhausen tried to do his sequel to Clash of the Titans, which should have been a shoe-in. And he had the script and he had everything else for it. And it didn't happen. It's kind of like so frustrating. But that story is replicated in American cinema often. And there are many books you can get now on great sequels or films that should have happened. There's Rian Johnson's version of what he would have done with the next Star Wars. There's even the supposed J.J. Abrams cut coming to Disney Plus for a definitive final version.
Right.
So I think when it's that big and it has that many people's input, it sometimes can dilute what would have been one man's vision when it was Milton. Milton did what he did. It has stood the test of time. It's had a 4K remaster ahead of any of the James Bond films from that era, or any of the James Bond films. When we think about the recent Daniel Craig films, they've been made commercially available as 4K releases, but none of the other titles have. And I'm sure they will be eventually, but it is a significant indicator that if you've had your film restored in 4K and reissued again to the marketplace, and I'm buying Doctor Who, is that for the fourth or fifth time? I'm losing count. That's something. Library titles that endure are really worth their weight in gold. And you look back at some of the big films in the day that had maybe William Holden or John Wayne or Charles Bronson, who were the big A stars in their time. A lot of them are languishing on the shelves, haven't even been restored in 2K.
That says it all, I think, because, folks who became fans of this property like I did in the 1980s, that's the only vote of confidence, or maybe 2 votes of confidence you need to be able to check out these films from the 1960s, is one, John's book. This 4K thing aside, John's book, I guess, is the main thing. And check out John's book. And John, thank you so much for your time today, helping us understand a little bit more about these films from the 60s that, again, have a maybe now a canonical connection to those to our favorite doctors from the 1980s. And we will make sure that folks go out and whatever. I'll plug your book earlier in the show and after the show. So I will just say thank you for your time today, John.
Well, my pleasure. And for everyone listening to this fabulous podcast, I wonder how many people saw it in the cinema in the 60s and who actually saw it on telly like I did in the 80s. So this is very much an 80s VHS film for people watching on TV, because the film was a reasonable license and it had no adult content. It could be shown numerous times during the daytime, and it was a good scheduled filler, but it was in the 80s that this film had most of its airplay.
It must be so cool to have access. Like, look, we're going to ask you to do this book, or sometimes in these situations, John pitches the book. I want to write about this movie, and they're like, all right, and then he gets access to a studio's everything. It's got to be really cool.
So cool. I learned something interesting.
Yeah,
I never thought about what Doctor Who meant. Of course, not watching the show. I'm not, steeped in any of the anything. But I didn't realize it's like he's called the Doctor.
Right, right.
And then, but the name of the show is Doctor Who. I never really thought about that. But so Doctor Who is like, is that what people say? Like, so if he says, I'm the Doctor, and people say, Doctor Who?
They don't beat that drum too much, but they definitely do, because that's his whole name. He doesn't he's not like, my name is Dr. David Jingleschmidt or something. He's the Doctor. That's all he is. And so people, of course, put him in a box like, well, Doctor Who? I'm just the Doctor.
Just the Doctor.
It's not used a lot, but it is used. Yeah,
but it's clever how it's not, the show's not called The Doctor. It's Doctor Who. That's definitely more, it's a little more of a hook, or a little, more compelling. Yeah.
It's a show that I wish I could, I wish I had watched since the beginning, or even jumped in when they started it up again in 2010, when it was like Stephen Moffat did. But it's like, it's one of those shows that it's intimidating to me because there's so many episodes, but they've had so many cool twists and turns and surprises. Like, especially recently, David Tennant's coming back, but the rumors are maybe he's not really the Doctor. Maybe he's really a villain pretending to be the Doctor, but we did see...
Maybe he's the Master or something. Yeah,
we did see Jodie Whittaker transform into the Doctor, into him. I don't know. But that stuff sounds so cool and wonderful and thrilling and surprising that if you're a fan, it just must be so, engaging. But like I said, it'll take me too long to catch up, so I get discouraged.
So we'll watch Quantum Leap instead.
Yeah, there you go. If it comes back.
January.
Yes.
And if you're a fan, or a fan of Doctor Who, check out the book. I read it. Seriously, even if you're not a huge fan of Doctor Who, it's really fascinating how these films came together. And again, even the story about Milton Subotsky is pretty neat.
Oh, cool.
But be sure you look up or pre-order, rather, John's book, Doctor Who and the Daleks, the official story of the films. Again, you can find it everywhere. I love bookshop.org because it supports independent bookstores.
Yeah.
So do that.
Do it.
And that's the show.
Dupes. I even said I'm going to be ready this time.
Dupes.
Our show is brought to you every week, thanks in part to our early adopters like Kathy Burke, Rick Parker, and Karen Flieger. And thanks especially to our Secret of Our Success level Patreon supporters, John Henderson, Craig Coletta, Marcus Taylor, and Tony Great.
Yes.
They're great.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you, each and every one of you, and everybody that helps to support the show in one way or another. And hey, you can support us too. There's plenty of free ways to do it. Share an episode, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook. And if you need any other ideas, or you want to find out how you can toss us $1 or $2, visit us at 1980snow.com/support.
That's right.
All right. Hey.
And leave us comments or send a message.
Yes.
Tell us about your pickle jar.
Yes. How big of a pickle jar would you need?
How many showers would you take?
How many showers would you take?
Are we talking a 12-ounce pickle jar? Or are we going a gallon?
Yeah.
I mean, did we buy it at Sam's, or did we buy it at the drugstore?
I guess it depends if you first eat the pickles, right? Because then you think like matter, the law of conservation of matter and energy. So, 32 ounces of pickles goes in. All right, what is happening?
Well, but then there's a density question.
Yes.
Is there? Is there?
Viscosity comes into play.
All right, hey, we will talk to you again next time on 1980s Now.
Until next time.
Bye-bye.
This podcast is part of the 80s Ruled Network. Visit the 80s Ruled on Facebook for more 1980s awesomeness.